everyone, and welcome to the MSRP Whiskey Room. My name is Jason C, and if you're a subscriber, thanks so much for the support and for coming back and watching. If you're new to the channel, looking for the latest in whiskey and bourbon news and reviews, you have found the right channel. So hit that subscribe button below and hit that bell notification so you know when I'm releasing a new video, or you can join in on one of my live streams. Indiana's famed MGP Distillery has launched its first bottled and bond bourbon under their well-known George Remus label. Released in November 2019, this offering coincides with the 100th anniversary of the enactment of the Volstead Act that enforced the 18th Amendment outlawing alcohol production and distribution in the U.S. And it's today's review on the MSRP. George Remus Bourbon and the annual Remus Repeal Reserve limited release, both are named after George Remus, known as the King of Bootleggers, and the inspiration for F. Scott Fitzgerald's title character in The Great Gatsby. For some of you, George Remus may be just another name on another bourbon, but his amazing story of crime, sex, betrayal, and murder makes Remus one of the most famous and notorious figures in bourbon history. Remus was born in Germany in 1876. As a preschooler, he came to the U.S. with his family in Chicago. Now, his father became incapacitated when Remus was only 14, and then he had to take the responsibility of taking care of his family. He had to leave school early, and he worked as a clerk in his uncle's drugstore, and then went on to pharmacy school and received a pharmacist's license at only age 19. At age 21, Remus bought that drugstore, and then soon bought another. In addition, he studied law, and within 18 months, he completed the 3-year program, and in 1900, at age 24, he gained admission into the Illinois bar, and as a trial lawyer, pioneered using the defense of guilt by reason of temporary insanity. Remember that little tidbit as we move in the story. As a defense attorney, Remus was making well over $500,000 per year in today's dollars. Now, when Prohibition went into effect in January of 1920, his practice soon became very busy defending bootleggers. But instead of George Remus seeing bootlegging as a problem, Remus saw it as a golden opportunity to make an enormous fortune. When Prohibition went into effect, millions of gallons of alcohol were in warehouses. With proper authorization, people could legally buy it for medicinal, scientific, or industrial purposes, and Remus wanted all he could get his hands on. Now, remember earlier how I mentioned Remus was a pharmacist? He knew doctors could write prescriptions for medicinal alcohol, and patients could then buy it at pharmacies. So after studying and finding this loophole in the Volstead Act, Remus, realizing alcohol could still be used for medicinal purposes, the former pharmacist had the idea to buy up distilleries to produce liquor legally, then he could have his own employees hijack the shipments. Since organized criminals like Al Capone already heavily controlled Chicago, and after a raid on one of his own warehouses, Remus moved to Cincinnati. As Remus himself explained, after surveying the entire country, I picked Cincinnati as my headquarters because 80% of the bonded whiskey in the country was within 300 miles of that city. After creating his own trucking company, George would again send large amounts of his bourbon on his own trucks to his own drug companies and then have them hijacked along the way. The stolen bourbon would then quickly make its way to George's warehouses on a Cincinnati farm called Death Valley. Now, with armed guards, whiskey runners, and a payroll of 3,000 workers, that included politicians and law enforcement officials, George's reputation as the king of the bootleggers was solidified. Now, Remus, of course, became rich, really rich. During one quarter in 1921, he deposited the equivalent in today's dollars of over $33 million in the bank. Remus made a big mistake, though. He flaunted his riches. Stories still float about the lavish parties he held at his Price Hill mansion, all his cars, and his 175,000 Grecian swimming pool. Now, with all this attention, the Prohibition Bureau bugged his hotel suite when he had a meeting with 44 of his own men. Remus had falsely thought that he had bought protection from federal prosecution. He had bribed a high official in the Department of Justice, but agents arrested him and charged him on 3,000 counts. The courts convicted him, and he was sentenced to only 2 years in jail. Okay, now here's where it gets crazy. When he left for prison, he gave power of attorney to his wife, Imogen, who now controlled his entire operation and all his assets. While in prison, George Remus told another inmate that his wife had his power of attorney. Little did he know the inmate was an undercover Prohibition agent who then resigned from his job and started an affair with Imogen. Together, they sold his assets, tried to hide it, tried unsuccessfully to have George Remus deported, and ultimately hired a hitman to kill him, all the while Imogen was trying to divorce him at the same time. Nuts. Fast forward to when George gets out of prison. In retaliation, he had his personal driver run his wife's car off the road, and then as she fled on foot, the driver chased her down and shot her to death. Remus was arrested again and acted as his own lawyer at his murder trial. Now, remember that little note I mentioned earlier about pleading insanity? He pled innocent by reason of, guess what? Insanity. The jury found him not guilty on the grounds of insanity, and he went to the state hospital for the criminally insane. After 2 months at that hospital and convincing the courts that he was miraculously no longer insane, Remus tried to start up bootlegging again, but found that violent gangsters controlled the market. Instead, he opened a real estate office, kept to himself, and eventually died at home of natural causes in 1952 at age 77. Crazy story. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that story. I know it was a little long, but I love getting into the stories behind the bourbons and who George Remus was, so I think it's absolutely fascinating. Now, on to the bourbon. To commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Volstead Act and King George's creativity in finding loopholes in that act, Remus Volstead Reserve is an MGP one-time release that has been aged for 14 years in honor of the 14 years of Prohibition. This is bottled in bond, bottled at 100 proof, and comes in a beautiful commemorative box, and each bottle inside is individually numbered. Volstead Reserve is a mingling of several bourbon batches with a mash bill of 75% corn, 21% rye, and 4% malted barley, mashed and distilled during the fall season of 2005. It's available in select markets now with an MSRP of $200. All right, so as this opens up, and I know you guys got a quick look at the bottle, but it's a beautiful bottle. It really kind of calls back to that Great Gatsby era. It really has that type of design. The box opens kind of sideways here from the middle. It's very elegant. The cork on this thing it feels like it weighs about 20 pounds. It's really, really heavy. If anything, if the juice isn't good, at least the bottle and the box are really beautiful. So let's get into the color, see what we get first. As you can see, it's got a nice golden honey color, a little bit of a copper, kind of a copper accent in there. It's got some really nice legs. It sticks to the glass well. It's got some good color. I mean, it's been sitting in barrels for 14 years, so it's going to have some good color to it. So let's get into the nose and see what we get. So when I first cracked this one open, I was getting that kind of that quintessential. Now, MGP to me always has a very unique, kind of an earthy, oaky flavor. And I really love that. And also the high rye part of it really comes through as well. So you really could smell that MGP DNA kind of running through the glass immediately. So you get some good oak. Get a ton of brown. I get a lot of brown sugar on the nose. It's very sweet coming off the nose. Yeah, one of the things that have become much more prevalent as this bottle's gotten a little bit of air is the citrus flavor. There is just so much orange coming out of here. It's very citrusy, very sugary sweet. It's almost like those candied oranges slices that you get, like those gummy oranges with the sugar kind of dusted on top of it. It really does smell like that. The orange for me is coming through very intense. But I also get a nice little chocolate note too that I wasn't getting earlier on. It was coming through more as an oak. Now coming through as a little bit more of a chocolate. Like chocolate covered orange rinds, which I think I've seen in some kind of high-end candy shops. There's a nice nuttiness too, and it's coming through kind of like those, one of my favorite flavors in bourbon, which is cinnamon dusted pecan note. This nose has gotten way better since I first opened it up. It was very oaky. It was almost kind of, I don't know, that leather note that you get from an older bourbon was really kind of coming strong. And I was trying to cut through to find those sweeter flavors, and now it's finally been opening up. So if you do get a bottle, give it some time. Yeah, you still get that little bit of a leather note from that age, from the 14 years old, but it really comes with some nice pecans, some beautiful orange spicy notes, some cinnamon, some pecan, a little bit of a chocolate. It's really a delicious one just to know. So let's go for a sip. Here we go. Cheers. So right in the front of the palate, you get a lot of nice caramel, but you get this spicy, prickly kind of pepper note. Or it could be like the tannin from the oak, from the barrel, from that age, being there for 14 years. It really provides a nice layer of flavor there. Then as it works its way back, then boom, here comes the citrus. Here comes the orange spice, cinnamon. You do get a little bit of that nutty note. But let's go in for another sip before we get into the finish. Here we go. Cheers. It's got a really nice proof to it. I mean, it's only 100 proof. I gotta admit, when I first saw the price, I was hoping it was gonna be cast strength for $200, but I could see why it's 100 proof. You know, it's kind of a callback to the story. Remus had all his bonded whiskey, so being 100 proof makes sense with the story behind the bottle. But yeah, now I'm getting a little bit more of a dark cherry note to it. There's some dark cherry here to go along with that orange. A lot of vanilla. I would say the finish on here right now is more kind of medium to long. It's not powerful, but it is providing a nice nice spice in the back end, which I love. So let's go for another sip. Here we go. Okay, so the third sip, the sweetness starts kind of taking a little bit more of a back seat now. Now the age starts coming into the forefront. You start getting more of the barrel char, a little bit more of the citrus notes. That orange citrus note is really strong. It's almost like I'm getting like this honey tea, like this honey orange tea note, which is slightly drying a little bit, but it's still very good. It's very unique. I really like it. Even though the sweetness flavors aren't as strong as they were in my first couple sips, there's still a really nice balance happening here in this bottle, which I really like. But the finish now with that age and that barrel char is becoming a little bit drying, just a little bit. It's kind of drying the palate out, especially on the back end. Let's go for another sip here. Yeah, you still get the caramel. You still kind of get those prickly black pepper notes in the front end. Still kind of sweet throughout the mid palate. When it gets to the finish though, that's when you're gonna get your age, your leather note, a little bit of that honey tea kind of note I was getting as well. But I'm also getting some nice baking spices back there too. That cinnamon pecan note is actually kind of transitioned from mid palate to the back palate, which is kind of nice. I'm kind of getting on the finish to kind of balance out the leather and kind of those ultra aged flavors that you get in a bourbon that's this old. So it really has some really nice bounce to it. Let's go in for one last sip. Cheers. All right, guys, so last sip. Now that my palate's gotten used to it, the finish is, I mean, this is really easy to sip on. It's 14 years old. It is very unique. I will give that to this bottle. That mix of kind of honey, tea, orange spice, the caramel, the proof point to it. I really like it a lot about this bottle. The only thing that's turning me off a little bit is kind of the drying aspect on the back of the palate. But other than that, it's a really well-balanced bourbon. All right, so if I could sum this up in one word, it would be balance. I think the balance of this bourbon is just really beautiful. It's got a lot of oak to it. It's got a lot of sweet. There's some peppery spice in the middle. It's unique. It's got that honey, tea, orange spice going on. Some little bit of a nuttiness character with the pecan flavor. It's really a nice bourbon. It does become a little bit more muted as you keep sipping on it. Those first 2 or 3 sips are really good. Once you get into these subsequent sips, it kind of gets a little bit more towards the oaky profile of the spectrum. But with that said, I don't know if there's enough of the distinction in this bottle for me to warrant to tell you to go out there and spend $200 on this with so many great bottle and bonds out there in the market. Now, for collectors out there, this is probably one you're going to want to get. It's exclusive. There's a great story behind it. It's a beautiful bottle and a beautiful box. For the everyday sipper out there that's on a budget, try this at a bar or somewhere else before possibly spending the money on this. Because as a good friend once told me, you can't drink the bottle and you can't drink the box. All right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this review for Remus Volstead Reserve. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the story. Hope it wasn't too long for you, but you know me, I like to go into the history behind each and every bottle and some of the people behind it. So with that said, if you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button below. Please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, find me on Instagram, find me on Twitter. Let me know if you've had this, what you think of it, if you had the same experience I did, if you like it more than I did, if you dislike it more than I did. I always love talking to you guys, and as I always say, it is not about the whiskey, it's the people you share it with. So cheers. Now I'm going to have some more Volstead. Take care, everybody.